He found his own grave before he remembered digging it. The name was carved deep into the stone, clean lines cut by a steady hand that hadn't trembled once, Ethan Cole, and beneath it a date that didn't make sense, a date from 3 years ago, a date that said he was supposed to be gone long before this moment, long before the dust on his boots and the sun on his back and the quiet breath in his chest proved otherwise. His fingers hovered inches from the letters, not touching, not yet, like the truth might bite if he got too close, like memory might come rushing back all at once and drown him where he stood. The cave was colder than the air outside, a dry kind of cold that settled into bone, carrying the faint smell of stone and time, and something else, something older, like secrets that had been waiting patiently in the dark. He swallowed slow, the sound loud in his own ears, and for a second the world narrowed to that name, his name, carved in a place no man stumbled into by accident. And then it hit him, not as a thought, not as a clear memory, but as a flicker, a sensation, the weight of a shovel in his hands, the scrape of metal against dirt, the rhythm of digging under a sky that wouldn't speak. It was gone as quickly as it came, leaving only the echo, leaving only the question that settled heavy in his chest. 3 days earlier, the sun had been higher, harsher, burning across the open stretch of land where the creek cut through rock and scrub, and Ethan had been alone the way he always was, riding without direction, carrying a past that felt just out of reach, like a word on the tip of his tongue he could never quite say. That's where he saw her, standing near the water like she'd been there longer than the land itself, still, watching him with eyes that didn't flinch, didn't soften, didn't look surprised. Most folks looked twice at a man like him, dust-covered, quiet, carrying more silence than answers, but she didn't. She just stood there, the light catching in her dark hair, the faint breeze moving the edges of her dress, and for a moment, it felt like he was the one out of place. He slowed his horse without thinking, the leather creaking under him, the reins loose in his hands as he studied her from a distance that should have felt safe. It didn't. There was something in the way she looked at him, not like a stranger, not like a threat, but like someone recognizing a shape they'd seen before in a dream they couldn't forget. He cleared his throat, the sound rough from disuse, and tipped his hat just enough to be polite without offering too much. "You lost?" he asked, simple, neutral, the kind of question that didn't invite trouble. She didn't answer right away, just watched him, steady, measuring, like time didn't press on her the way it did on everyone else. Then she spoke, her voice low, calm, carrying across the water without effort. "You've been here before." It wasn't a question. Ethan frowned, a slight pull at the corner of his mouth, the kind of reaction that came before words caught up. "Don't think so," he said, glancing around at the land like it might confirm it for him, like the rocks and the trees might tell him what he couldn't tell himself. Nothing did, just the same silence he'd been carrying for miles. She tilted her head, just a fraction, like she'd expected that answer and found it lacking anyway. "You don't remember," she said, softer this time, and there was something in it, not pity, not quite, but something close enough to make his chest tighten. He shifted in the saddle, uncomfortable in a way he couldn't explain, like she'd reached into a place he kept locked without knowing how she'd found the key. "Remember what?" he asked, sharper than before, not angry, just needing something solid to stand on. She didn't give it to him. Instead, she turned, slow, deliberate, and started walking along the edge of the creek, not looking back, not checking if he'd follow, as if that part had already been decided somewhere he hadn't been invited. Ethan sat there for a second longer than he should have, watching her move through the light, steady, certain, like she knew exactly where she was going and exactly who he was, even if he didn't. Then he exhaled, long and quiet, and nudged the horse forward, falling in behind her without another word, because something in him, something deeper than reason, told him that whatever waited ahead wasn't new. It was something he'd already chosen once, something he just couldn't remember choosing again. The creek ran narrow and quiet beside them, no more than 15 feet across, its surface catching the late afternoon light in broken pieces that shifted with every ripple, and still she did not slow, did not turn, did not speak again after those few words that had settled into him like a weight he could not set down. Ethan kept his horse a few paces behind, the animal's hooves soft against the dirt, the rhythm steady, almost comforting. if not for the way his thoughts refused to settle into anything clear. He had been here before. The words circled back again and again, not loud, not urgent, just present, like something waiting for him to acknowledge it properly. He tried to place the land, the curve of the creek, the slope of the hills rising on either side, the scattered juniper and scrub stretching out under a sky that seemed too wide for memory to hold, but nothing came. Only that same hollow space where something should have been. She moved with certainty, stepping over stones without looking down, weaving through the brush like she knew exactly where each path led. And more than once Ethan noticed she avoided certain turns, certain narrow passages where the rock closed in tighter, as if those places mattered in ways she chose not to explain. He leaned forward slightly in the saddle, studying her back, the way her shoulders stayed relaxed, the way her hands never hesitated, and something about it unsettled him more than if she had been nervous. People who knew too much about where they were going usually had a reason. "You always this quiet?" he called out after a while, his voice carrying just enough to reach her without sounding like a challenge. She did not stop, but her head shifted just enough that he knew she heard him. "Only when words are not needed," she replied, her tone even, almost distant, like she was speaking from somewhere further away than the few yards between them. Ethan let out a breath through his nose, a faint half-smile that never quite reached his eyes. "That's so," he muttered, more to himself than to her, but the silence that followed pressed in heavier than before. A hawk circled high above, its shadow gliding across the ground in slow arcs, and the wind carried the dry scent of dust and sun-warmed stone, the kind of smell that usually felt familiar, grounding. Today it did not. Today it felt like a place he had been dropped into rather than one he belonged to. They walked like that for what felt like miles, though time stretched strangely. Each step measured more by the weight in his chest than the distance under his horse's hooves, until the creek began to narrow further, disappearing between taller rock formations that rose like walls on either side. The light shifted there, softer, filtered, and the air cooled just enough to notice. She slowed for the first time, not stopping, just easing her pace, and Ethan felt it immediately, the change in the way the world seemed to hold its breath. His gaze drifted ahead, scanning the path, and then something caught his eye, a flicker of silver against the muted colors of stone and earth. It hung at her neck, partially hidden beneath the fabric of her dress, a small pendant that moved with each step she took. Simple, worn, and somehow unmistakably familiar. His brow furrowed, and without thinking, he nudged his horse a little closer, closing the distance by a few feet. "That pendant," he said, the words coming slower now, more careful, like he was stepping onto uncertain ground. "Where did you get it?" She stopped then, not abruptly, not startled, just a quiet halt, like she had reached a point she had been expecting all along. For a moment, she did not turn. The breeze shifted, brushing past them, carrying a faint scent of something older, something like smoke long since faded into memory. Then she lifted her hand and touched the pendant lightly, her fingers resting against it as if it carried more than its weight suggested. "You gave it to me," she said. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, sharp and sudden, like a thread pulled too fast. "I have never seen that before," he replied. But even as the words left his mouth, they sounded less certain than he wanted them to be. She turned then, slowly, her eyes meeting his, steady and unreadable, and for the first time since he had seen her, there was something different in her expression. Not doubt, not anger, something closer to patience. "You do not remember giving it," she said. "That does not mean it did not happen." The world seemed to narrow again, not to the size of a cave or a grave this time, but to the space between them, to the small piece of silver catching the light, to the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something he had once stepped into willingly. Ethan swallowed, his hand tightening slightly on the reins, and for a brief moment, another flicker passed through his mind, not clear, not complete, just a glimpse of his own hand placing that pendant into someone else's palm, the weight of it leaving him, the sense of something being entrusted rather than lost. It vanished as quickly as it came, leaving him with nothing but the echo. "Why are you taking me out here?" he asked, quieter now, the edge gone from his voice, replaced by something else, something closer to concern than suspicion. She studied him for a second longer, then turned back toward the narrowing path between the rocks. "Because you asked me to," she said, and without another word, she stepped forward into the shadowed passage ahead, leaving him to follow once more, carrying a past that was beginning, piece by piece, to follow him back. The passage between the rocks narrowed until the sky above became a thin strip of pale blue, barely wider than the span of a man's shoulders, and the sound of the creek behind them faded into something distant, something that no longer belonged to where they were going. Ethan dismounted without being told, the shift from saddle to ground feeling heavier than it should have, as if each step forward carried more than just his weight. His boots pressed into the packed earth, the air cooler here, still, holding on to shadows that the sun could not quite reach. Ayana moved ahead of him, her pace unchanged, her presence steady in a way that made the silence feel intentional rather than empty. He led his horse by the reins for a few yards before realizing the animal had stopped on its own, ears pinned slightly back, refusing to go further into the narrowing path. Ethan paused, giving a gentle tug, but the horse did not budge. It was not fear exactly, not panic, just a quiet refusal, the kind animals had when something did not sit right with them. He exhaled slowly and released the reins, letting them fall loose. "Stay," he murmured, though he was not sure if he was speaking to the horse or to himself. Ayana did not look back. She simply continued forward, disappearing briefly around a bend where the rock curved inward. Ethan hesitated only a moment before following, his hand brushing lightly against the stone as he moved, the surface cool and rough beneath his fingers. The further he went, the more the world behind him seemed to fade, replaced by the steady rhythm of his own breathing and the faint echo of footsteps that did not quite match his own. It was subtle at first, a second set of sounds layered beneath his own, slightly out of time, like a memory trying to align itself with the present. He slowed, listening, but when he stopped, the echo stopped too. Only silence remained. He moved again, and it returned. Not ahead, not behind, around him. He swallowed, forcing himself to keep walking, because turning back no longer felt like an option he could trust. The path opened suddenly, the tight walls giving way to a small hollow carved into the rock, and there she stood, waiting this time, facing him. The light here was dimmer, filtered through the narrow opening above, casting soft shadows that shifted with every movement. She watched him approach, her gaze steady, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan glanced around, taking in the space, the smooth curve of the walls, the ground beneath his boots worn in places where footsteps had passed more than once. "This is where you brought me?" he asked, his voice lower now, as if the space itself demanded it. Ayana shook her head slightly. "This is where you began to remember," she said. The words settled in the air between them, quiet but heavy, and something in his chest responded before his mind could catch up. He frowned, stepping further into the hollow, his eyes adjusting to the dim light, searching for something he did not yet know how to name. That was when he saw it. A marking on the stone wall, faint at first, easy to miss if you were not looking for it. A series of lines etched into the surface, uneven, worn by time, but still there. He moved closer, drawn to it. Without thinking, his fingers lifting again, hovering just above the marks before finally making contact. The stone was cold, but the shape beneath his fingertips felt familiar, not in the way of something he had seen, but something he had done. A slow breath left him as another flicker rose up, stronger this time, more than just a sensation. He saw his own hand, gripping a knife, pressing into stone, carving those same lines with deliberate care, not rushed, not uncertain, each movement measured as if the act itself mattered more than the result. He felt the resistance of the rock, the slight vibration through his fingers, the quiet focus of someone leaving something behind that needed to last. The vision faded, leaving him staring at the marks, his hand still resting against them. "I made this," he said, not asking, not guessing, just stating it because something deeper than memory had already decided it was true. Ayana stepped closer, stopping a few feet away, giving him space but not distance. "Yes," she replied softly. Ethan pulled his hand back, turning to face her, the questions in his eyes sharper now, more urgent, but still held in check by something he did not fully understand. "Why?" he asked. She held his gaze, and for the first time, there was a trace of something like sadness in her expression, quiet and controlled, but there. "Because you knew you would forget," she said. The words landed harder than anything else she had said so far. Not loud, not dramatic, just final in a way that left no room for easy answers. Ethan let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding, his shoulders lowering slightly as the weight of it settled in. He turned back to the wall, to the marks, to the proof that he had stood here once before with a purpose he could not yet remember. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the confusion, beneath the unease, a single thought began to take shape, slow and steady, like something rising from beneath the surface. This was not a place he had been led to. This was a place he had chosen. The marks on the stone held his attention longer than they should have, as if the longer he looked, the more they might shift into something clearer, something that could speak back to him and explain why his own hand had once pressed into rock with such certainty. Ethan stepped back slowly, the echo of that memory still lingering in his fingertips, and for a moment he simply stood there, breathing in the cool, still air, trying to steady the quiet storm building inside his chest. "If I knew I would forget," he said, his voice low, measured, "then I knew something was worth remembering." Ayana did not answer right away. She moved past him instead, her steps soft against the ground, until she stood beside the wall, her gaze resting on the same marks he had just touched. "You did," she said finally, her tone calm, but carrying something heavier beneath it. Ethan turned his head slightly, watching her, waiting, but she did not look at him. "Then tell me what it is," he pressed, the edge returning just enough to show through. Not anger, but urgency shaped into words. "You have been speaking like you are holding the rest of the story in your hands." A faint breath left her, almost like a sigh, though it did not carry frustration. It carried patience, the kind that came from knowing something could not be rushed. "If I tell you everything," she said, "you will hear it." She paused then, just long enough for the weight of that distinction to settle. "But you will not remember it." Ethan frowned, the words settling in a place he did not fully understand but could not dismiss. "And if I remember it myself?" he asked. She turned then, meeting his eyes again, steady as before. "Then it will stay." The silence that followed felt different this time, not empty, but full of something unspoken, something waiting for him to take the next step without being pushed. Ethan let out a slow breath, his gaze drifting once more to the wall, to the lines he had carved with his own hands, and he felt it again, that pull, not outward, not forward, but inward, like something just beneath the surface of his mind pressing gently, insistently, asking to be seen. He closed his eyes for a moment, not fully, just enough to soften the edges of the world around him, and let his hand rise again, this time pressing flat against the stone. The cold seeped into his palm, grounding him, anchoring him in the present even as something from the past began to stir. At first, it was only sound. Not clear, not formed into words, just a low murmur carried on air that did not belong to this moment. Then came movement, the faint shift of shadows that did not match the light above him, and slowly, like a picture forming in water, the fragments began to align. He saw himself standing in this same hollow, the walls closer, the light dimmer, his shoulders heavier as if carrying something unseen. His hand moved across the stone, carving, marking, leaving behind proof that he had been here, that something had mattered enough to make it last. He heard a voice then, not his own, quiet but steady, speaking words he could not fully catch, only the feeling behind them, something like a promise made without certainty of keeping it. The image wavered, shifting, and for a brief moment he saw another shape beside him, not clear enough to define, just a presence, someone standing close enough to matter, far enough to remain just out of reach. Then it was gone. Ethan's eyes opened slowly, the cave returning to its stillness, the present settling back into place around him. His hand dropped from the wall, and he drew in a breath that felt deeper than the ones before, like something inside him had shifted, not fully, not enough to answer everything, but enough to change the way the questions felt. "I was not alone," he said, the words quiet but certain. Ayana nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it carried weight. "No," she said. Ethan studied her face, searching for something, anything that might bridge the gap between what he had just seen and what she already knew, but her expression remained steady, offering nothing more than what she had already given. "Was it you?" he asked. The question lingered between them, simple, direct, but carrying more than it seemed. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then shook her head gently. "Not then," she replied. The answer settled into him, not as disappointment, but as another piece of something larger, something still just out of reach. He looked past her then, deeper into the hollow, noticing for the first time that the space did not end where he had thought it did. There was a darker opening further in, a narrow entrance cut into the rock. Easy to miss if you were not looking for it, leading somewhere deeper, somewhere the light did not touch at all. "There is more," he said, not a question this time. Ayana followed his gaze, then stepped aside slightly, giving him a clear path forward. "Yes," she said quietly. Ethan stood there for a second longer, feeling the weight of everything he did not yet understand pressing against the choice in front of him. And then he moved, stepping past her and toward the darker passage, not because he had answers, but because something inside him no longer felt like it could turn away. The darkness inside the narrow passage did not fall all at once. It gathered slowly, step by step, swallowing the last traces of daylight until the world behind Ethan felt farther away than it should have for a distance of barely 20 feet. The air shifted as he moved forward, cooler, heavier, carrying a faint scent of damp stone and something older, something that had not been touched by sunlight in years, maybe longer. His boots echoed differently here, each step returning to him a fraction too late, like the cave was answering in its own time, not his. He reached out instinctively, his hand brushing along the wall, fingers tracing the uneven surface, grounding himself in something real as the space tightened and curved inward. Behind him, he could still hear Ayana's presence, not through sound exactly, but through the steady awareness that she had not left, that she was allowing him to move ahead alone without ever truly being alone. The passage opened gradually, the ceiling lifting just enough to let him stand fully upright, and a dim light appeared ahead, not natural, not sunlight, but something softer, reflected, as if the cave itself held on to a memory of brightness and refused to let it go completely. Ethan slowed, his breath steady but deeper now, the kind of breathing that came when a man knew he was stepping into something that could not be undone once seen. He rounded the final bend, and the space revealed itself in quiet stillness. It was not large, not grand, but it was deliberate. The walls curved in a near circle, smooth in places, marked in others, and the ground beneath his boots had been cleared of loose stone as if someone had once taken care to make it so. In the center of the space stood a single object, simple and unmoving, yet carrying a weight that seemed to press against the air around it. A wooden post, about 4 feet tall, driven firmly into the ground, weathered by time, but still standing straight. Ethan stopped a few feet away, his eyes fixed on it, the shape of it already familiar before his mind could explain why. His chest tightened slightly, not from fear, not exactly, but from recognition that did not come with memory, only with certainty. He took one slow step forward, then another, the sound of his boots softer now, as if the space itself demanded respect without ever asking for it. As he drew closer, he saw the details more clearly. The wood was worn smooth in places where hands had touched it more than once, the grain darkened by time, and near the top, carved carefully into its surface, were letters. Not deep, not freshly cut, but precise, intentional, each line placed with care. Ethan felt his breath catch slightly as he stepped within arm's reach, his eyes tracing the shape of the letters before fully reading them, as if some part of him already knew what they would say. His hand lifted slowly, hesitating just inches away, the same instinct from before returning, that quiet warning that touching this would not just confirm something, it would change something. He swallowed, then let his fingers press against the wood. The surface was dry, rough in places, and the contact sent a subtle shiver through his arm, not cold, not painful, just present. He read the name then, fully, clearly, without doubt. Ethan Cole. The letters did not waver. They did not shift. They did not offer any other explanation. Beneath the name, carved in smaller lines, was a date. His eyes moved down, slowly, almost unwillingly, until they settled on it. 3 years ago. The same as before. The same truth, repeated, not hidden, not disguised, just waiting. Ethan's hand remained against the wood, but his fingers tightened slightly, gripping the edge as if to steady himself against something that was not physical. For a moment, the cave felt smaller, the air closer, the silence louder than any sound he had heard on the open plains. He closed his eyes briefly, and this time the memory did not come as a flicker. It came as a weight. He felt the ground beneath his knees, the firmness of it as he pressed the post into place, his hands steady, deliberate, not rushed. He felt the shape of the knife in his grip as he carved the letters, each stroke careful, each line something he intended to last beyond himself. There was no confusion in that memory, no hesitation, only purpose, the feeling of finishing something that had already been decided. His eyes opened again, and the cave returned, unchanged, waiting. Ethan stepped back half a pace, his hand falling away from the wood, his chest rising and falling a little slower now as he tried to place himself within what he was seeing. "I did this," he said quietly, not to ask, not to confirm, but because the truth had already settled into him before the words formed. Behind him, Ayana's voice came, soft but clear, carrying through the stillness without breaking it. "Yes." He did not turn right away. His gaze remained on the post, on the name, on the date that should not have belonged to him. "Why would a man mark his own grave?" he asked, the question low, almost to himself, but meant to be heard. There was a pause, not long, but long enough to feel. Then she answered, her voice steady, unchanged. "Because he was trying to leave something behind." Ethan's brow tightened slightly, the words settling into him, not as a solution, but as another door opening where there had been only a wall. He turned then, slowly, facing her, his expression not panicked, not lost, but focused in a way it had not been before. "What was I trying to leave behind?" he asked. Ayana met his gaze, her eyes holding his without hesitation, without avoidance. And for the first time since this began, she did not answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer to the post, her hand lifting to rest lightly against the wood just below where his name had been carved. "That," she said softly, "is what you came back to remember." The words settled into Ethan slowly, not like an answer, but like something heavier, something that did not rush to be understood because it did not need to be. He stood there in the dim light, his gaze shifting between Ayana's hand resting on the wood and the name carved above. His name, a fact that no longer felt distant or impossible, only incomplete. "Came back," he repeated quietly, the phrase lingering in his mouth like it belonged to someone else. "That means I left." Ayana did not move her hand. She only nodded once, her eyes still on the post, not on him. "You did," she said. Ethan let out a slow breath, his shoulders lowering just slightly as the pieces began to arrange themselves in a way that felt less like confusion and more like direction. "And I planned it," he added, not as a question, but as a realization forming in real time. "I knew I would not remember, so I left something behind to find again." This time, she looked at him, and there was something different in her expression, not surprise, not approval, but recognition, as if he had reached a point she had been waiting for without ever needing to guide him directly. "Yes," she said simply. Ethan's gaze drifted past her then, back to the space around them, the careful way the ground had been cleared, the deliberate placement of the post, the markings he had carved earlier in the passage. None of it was random. None of it was desperate. It had all been done with intention, with time, with a mind that knew exactly what it was doing. "I was not running," he said after a moment, his voice steady, quieter than before, but more certain. "I was preparing." Ayana's eyes held his, and for a brief second, the silence between them felt almost like agreement. "You were choosing," she replied. The word landed differently. "Choosing. Not escaping. Not hiding. Choosing." Ethan nodded once, slowly, the idea settling into him with a kind of weight that did not press down, but grounded him. He stepped closer to the post again, his hand lifting, but this time he did not hesitate. His fingers traced the edge of the carved letters, following the lines he had made, feeling the slight grooves beneath his skin, and as he did, something shifted again. Not a full memory. Not yet. But a feeling. A decision made not in fear, but in clarity. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, and let that feeling expand. The cave faded slightly, not disappearing, just stepping back, making room for something else to rise. He saw himself standing here. Again, not confused, not searching, but focused, calm in a way that felt earned. He was speaking, not loudly, not with urgency, but with certainty, as if the words mattered more because they were meant to last. "If I forget," the voice said, his voice steady and clear, "then I come back here." The memory held longer this time, enough for him to feel the weight of those words as they were spoken, enough to understand that they were not a hope, not a possibility, but a plan already set into motion. The image shifted, and for a brief moment, he saw the pendant again, felt it in his hand before placing it into someone else's, the act deliberate, the meaning behind it deeper than a simple exchange. Then it faded, leaving him standing in the present once more, his hand still resting against the wood. His eyes opened slowly, and when he looked at Ayano again, there was something new in his gaze. Not confusion, not doubt, something closer to understanding, though not complete. "You were there," he said, not asking, but connecting what he had felt with what stood in front of him now. Ayana did not deny it. She did not confirm it outright either. She simply held his gaze, her expression calm, her presence steady. "I was part of it," she said. Ethan studied her for a moment longer, the pieces aligning just enough to change the shape of his questions. "Then you are not just leading me back," he said. "You are making sure I finish what I started." Ayana's hand slipped away from the post, falling back to her side as she stepped back half a pace, giving him space once more, but not distance. "I am making sure you remember why," she said softly. The words settled deeper than the others had, not because they were louder, but because they pointed somewhere he had not yet looked. "Why?" Ethan's gaze returned to the post, to the name, to the date, and for the first time, the question did not feel like something outside of him. It felt like something waiting inside, something he had already answered once and would have to answer again. He exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening just slightly, not from resistance, but from the weight of what was coming into view. "Then this was not about leaving a place," he said, more to himself now than to her. "It was about leaving a version of me." Ayana did not interrupt. She did not correct him. She only watched, allowing the thought to settle fully on its own. Ethan's fingers curled slightly against the wood, and as he stood there, the silence around them no longer felt empty. It felt full of something waiting to be seen, something that had been buried not in the ground beneath the post, but in the space between who he had been and who he had chosen to become. And somewhere deep inside, just beneath the surface of his thoughts, another memory began to stir, not yet clear, but closer now than it had ever been. Like a door he had once closed with purpose was beginning, slowly, to open again. The air in the cave felt different now, not heavier, not colder, but aware, as if the space itself had been waiting for him to reach this point, for him to stand in front of what he had made and begin to understand what it meant. Ethan did not move for a while, his hand still resting against the post, his eyes tracing the lines of his own name as if they might shift if he looked long enough, as if they might reveal something more than what they already had. But they did not. They stayed exactly as they were, steady, certain, unchanging. The truth did not move to meet him. He had to move toward it. He exhaled slowly, his fingers loosening their grip on the wood, and this time when he closed his eyes, he did not wait for the memory to come. He reached for it. Not with force, not with urgency, but with intention, the same kind of intention that had carved those letters into the surface in the first place. At first, there was nothing, just darkness behind his eyes and the faint echo of his own breathing. Then, slowly, something shifted. Not an image, a feeling, a weight in his chest that did not belong to this moment. It was older, heavier, carried from somewhere he had left behind. His brow tightened slightly, and he let the feeling settle instead of pushing it away. It grew clearer, forming edges, taking shape. He was standing somewhere open this time, not in the cave, but under a wide sky. The kind that stretched for miles without interruption, the sun lower, casting long shadows across the land. The wind moved through dry grass, carrying dust, and something else, something quiet, something final. He felt it before he saw it. That sense that something had already ended, not suddenly, not violently, but completely, like a chapter closed with no intention of being reopened. He was not alone there either. He could feel that presence again, closer now, clearer, standing just behind him, not touching, not speaking, but there in a way that mattered. The memory shifted, and this time he heard his own voice again, Not uncertain, not searching, but steady, grounded. "I cannot carry this forward," he said, the words simple, but filled with something deeper than they appeared. There was a pause, not empty, but full, like the land itself was listening. "Then leave it here," another voice answered, softer, familiar, not as distant as before. He did not turn in the memory, but he understood that voice now, not through recognition of sound, but through the feeling it carried. It was hers, Iona's. The image held longer this time, enough for him to feel the weight of the choice pressing against him, not forced, not demanded, but offered. He looked down in the memory, though he could not see clearly what he held, only that it mattered, that it had followed him longer than it should have, that it had shaped him in ways he no longer wanted to carry forward. The wind shifted again, and with it came a quiet understanding, not spoken, not explained, just present. Leaving something behind was not about forgetting it. It was about choosing not to be defined by it anymore. The memory broke gently, like a ripple fading across still water, and Ethan opened his eyes once more, the cave returning around him, the post in front of him, Iona standing just a few feet away, watching without interruption, without expectation. He drew in a deeper breath this time, his chest rising fully before slowly settling again. And when he looked at her, the uncertainty that had filled his eyes before was not gone, but it had changed. It had direction now. "It was not fear," he said quietly. "Whatever I left here, I did not leave it because I was afraid." Iona nodded once, her expression unchanged, but her eyes holding a quiet confirmation. "No," she said. Ethan glanced back at the post, at the name, at the date that had once felt like a contradiction and now felt like something else entirely, something intentional. "I chose to end something," he continued, the words forming more steadily now, not guessed, but uncovered. "And I knew I would need to forget it to make that choice real." Iona stepped closer again, not enough to take his space, just enough to stand beside him rather than behind him, her presence no longer guiding from a distance, but sharing the same ground. "You chose to let go," she said softly. Ethan considered that for a moment, the phrase settling into him, not resisting it, not questioning it, just letting it find its place. "And now I came back," he added, his voice quieter again, but steady. "Not to take it back." He paused, his gaze drifting once more to the carved letters, to the version of himself that had stood here before with a clear purpose. "But to understand why I had to let it go in the first place." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, but no longer heavy. It held space instead of pressure. Iona looked at him, her expression calm, but there was something new there now, something like approval, though it did not need to be spoken. "Then you are ready to see the rest," she said. Ethan did not ask what she meant. He did not need to, because somewhere beneath the surface, the next piece had already begun to rise, not as a question this time, but as an answer waiting to be fully remembered. The cave did not change, but something inside Ethan did, and that shift made the silence feel different, less like something pressing in and more like something opening outward, as if the space had been waiting not for him to arrive, but for him to understand why he had come. He stood beside the post, his name carved into it like a truth that had never needed to explain itself, and for the first time since he had seen it, he did not feel the need to question it. Instead, he felt the need to face it. His gaze lowered slightly, not to the ground beneath the post, but to the space around it, the area that had been cleared with care, the absence of anything else marking that this place was not meant to hold many things, only one. Only him. He drew in a slow breath, steady, deliberate, and let it out just as slowly, his shoulders settling as if something that had been held tight inside him for longer than he remembered had finally begun to loosen. "There is more here," he said quietly, not looking at Iona this time, but speaking into the space itself, as if the answer might come from the stone rather than from her. Iona did not move. She did not step forward or closer. She only watched him, her presence steady, allowing the moment to belong to him alone. Ethan lowered himself slowly, his boots shifting against the packed earth as he moved, until he was kneeling beside the post, his hands resting lightly on his thighs, his head slightly bowed, not in defeat, not in surrender, but in recognition. The position felt familiar, not forced, not strange, just right in a way he could not explain. His eyes closed again, and this time the memory did not resist him. It came, not in fragments, not in flickers, but in something closer to a full shape, still soft at the edges, but whole enough to carry meaning. He was here again, kneeling in the same place, the same posture, the same quiet weight in his chest, but there was something different. The feeling was clearer, stronger, not confusion, not searching, acceptance. He felt it settle into him like something already decided. The air in that moment had been still, just like now, the cave holding its breath around him, and he had not been alone. Ayana had been there, standing just behind him, not speaking, not interrupting, simply present in a way that made the silence feel complete rather than empty. He heard his own voice again, but this time it carried more than words. It carried a decision that had already been lived through before it was spoken. "If I walk out of here," he said, slowly, clearly, "then I do not carry it with me." The words hung in the air, not needing an answer, not asking for permission. They were not a question. They were a boundary. The memory held steady, and for the first time, Ethan felt what those words had meant when they were first spoken. It was not about leaving behind a place. It was not about escaping something that had happened. It was about refusing to let something continue shaping who he would become. The past had not been erased. It had been set down, carefully, deliberately, like placing a burden on the ground and choosing not to pick it up again. The image shifted slightly, and Ethan saw his own hands then, steady, calm, pressing into the earth at the base of the post, smoothing the dirt, making sure it held, making sure it would remain exactly where it was meant to stay. There was no rush in those movements. No hesitation, only completion. The memory faded slowly this time, not breaking apart, not slipping away, but settling back into him as something he now carried differently, not as confusion, but as understanding. Ethan opened his eyes, and the cave returned, unchanged, but no longer unfamiliar. He looked down at the ground beneath the post, really looked this time, noticing the subtle difference in the soil, the way it had been disturbed long ago, and then carefully set back into place. It was not just a marker. It was a boundary. He remained kneeling for a moment longer, his hands now resting lightly against the ground, feeling the firmness beneath his fingers, the stillness of it, the quiet certainty that whatever had been left here was meant to stay. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his movements unhurried, his gaze lifting from the ground to the post, and then finally to Ayana. There was no urgency in his expression now, no confusion, only clarity that had taken its time to arrive. "I did not come back to take it," he said, his voice calm, steady. Ayana met his gaze, her eyes holding his with that same quiet strength she had carried from the beginning. "No," she said. Ethan nodded once, the motion small but certain. "I came back to make sure I would not pick it up again." The words settled into the space between them, not heavy, not sharp, just true. Ayana's expression softened slightly, not into a smile, not into anything that needed to be named, but into something that acknowledged the distance he had traveled without ever moving more than a few steps inside this cave. "Then you understand," she said quietly. Ethan glanced once more at the post, at the name carved into it, at the date that had once felt like a contradiction and now felt like a line drawn with purpose. He did not reach for it again. He did not touch it. He simply looked, and then he turned away, not in rejection, not in fear, but in completion. And as he took his first step back toward the passage they had come through, the air behind him remained still, the post unmoving, the name unchanged, exactly where it had been left, exactly where it was meant to stay. The passage out of the cave felt shorter on the way back, though Ethan knew the distance had not changed, the walls still close in the same places, the air still cool and still, the faint echo of his steps still returning to him with that same quiet delay. But something inside him no longer resisted the space, no longer searched for meaning in every shadow or sound. He walked with a steadiness that had not been there before, his hand no longer trailing along the stone for reassurance, his gaze fixed ahead where the thin line of daylight waited, soft and pale at first, then growing stronger with each step. Behind him, the cave remained exactly as it had been, unchanged, holding what had been left there without question, without judgment. He did not turn back, not because he was afraid to, but because he did not need to. The past did not call him anymore. It simply existed where he had placed it. Ayana walked beside him now, not leading, not guiding from a distance, but moving in quiet rhythm with his steps, her presence no longer something he followed, but something he understood. They did not speak as they moved through the narrowing path, and the silence between them felt complete, not empty, not waiting to be filled. When they stepped out from between the rocks, the open sky returned all at once, wide and bright. The late afternoon sun stretching long shadows across the land, the wind moving freely again, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant water. Ethan paused just beyond the entrance, his boots settling into the dust, and for a moment he simply stood there, breathing in the open air as if it was something new, something he had not fully known how to feel before. The world had not changed. The land was the same. The sky was the same. But the weight he had carried into that cave was no longer resting on his shoulders in the same way. It had not disappeared. It had been set down. He turned slightly, not toward the cave, but toward the land ahead, his gaze stretching out across the distance, taking in the quiet expanse that waited without expectation. Ayana stopped beside him, her eyes following the same horizon, her posture calm, steady, as it had always been. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan spoke, his voice low, but clear, not searching, not uncertain. "I thought forgetting meant losing something," he said. Ayana did not look at him. She kept her gaze on the horizon, her expression unchanged. "Most people do," she replied softly. Ethan nodded once, the motion small, almost unnoticeable, but it carried weight. "But it was not loss," he continued. "It was a choice." The wind moved through the space between them, lifting dust lightly from the ground, carrying it past them without resistance. Ayana's hand rose briefly, touching the pendant at her neck, the small piece of silver catching the sunlight for just a moment before settling again. "You chose what to carry forward," she said. Ethan's gaze shifted to the pendant for a second, the memory of placing it in her hand no longer distant, no longer unclear, but part of something he now understood. "And what to leave behind," he added quietly. The words did not feel heavy. They felt complete. Ayana turned her head then, looking at him fully, her eyes steady, but softer than before, as if something that had been held in place had finally been released. "You do not need me to lead you anymore," she said. It was not a question. It was not a farewell. It was simply the truth, spoken without hesitation. Ethan met her gaze, and for a moment, the silence returned, but it was different now, no longer filled with things unsaid, but with things already understood. He nodded once, slowly. "No," he said. A faint shift moved through her expression, something that might have been a smile if it had needed to be, but it did not linger long enough to take form. She stepped back half a pace, not distancing herself, but giving him the space that had always been his to take. Ethan turned then, fully this time, facing the open land ahead, and without another word, he began to walk. His steps were steady, unhurried, the rhythm natural, not forced, not guided. The path in front of him was not marked, not carved into the ground the way the lines in the cave had been, but it did not need to be. He carried enough now to know where he was going, even without knowing exactly where it would lead. Behind him, Ayana remained where she was, her figure still against the backdrop of stone and sky, watching for a moment longer before the wind shifted again and the space between them widened, not in distance alone, but in purpose. Ethan did not look back. He did not need to see the cave again to know it was still there, holding what he had chosen to leave, unchanged, untouched, exactly where it belonged. And as he walked forward into the fading light, the name carved in stone behind him no longer felt like something waiting to be reclaimed. It felt like something already laid to rest, not in the ground, but in the part of him that no longer needed to carry it.